Hi, and welcome to the 22nd Duck Film Festival. We're honored to have Shalini Kantaya with us, the filmmaker of Coded Bias, today. This webinar will be 30 minutes long, and we would like to invite you to leave your questions in the Q&A section at any time. I'll moderate them. I'm Jonathan Klinger, your host today. So I wanted to start, Shalini, and ask, what brought you to make a film about algorithms? I mean, you have seen what goes around outside in the world now. Is algorithms the most important things to do a film about? Isn't global warming and water crisis more important?
I didn't set out to make a film about algorithms. None of my films sort of start issue based, although I've made films about both the climate crisis and the water crisis already. But I think none of my films sort of start with issues or political motivations. They all start with a character. And with this film, the character is Joy Boldamwini, an extremely brilliant MIT Media Lab researcher who discovers that facial recognition is racially biased. And so I think meeting her and um, following where her research takes her sort of set me on this journey.
So you took my second question, just running in, and how do you collect characters for your movie, for your film? You have these themes going on alongside film, but the characters are, well, I have to say, very interesting. Each and every one of them seems like they deserve their own 90-minute full feature. Their stories are so wide, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I mean, how do you meet them? I guess the Joy was the first one that you met, and she took you to some of these guys. But can you tell how does filmmaker go
Absolutely.
to
I
meet
mean,
people?
it was sort of a process of discovery. And in a lot of cases, I saw a TED talk or I read one of their books. And what I came to see was that there was this um, dark underbelly of big tech. And it was actually women who were shining a light on it. And I think that I feel a debt of gratitude to the women in my film because they gave me a real education of how to understand these issues. And hopefully, and I think they have this unique perspective, each of them. What is common to all of them is they both have sort of extreme expertise in artificial intelligence, data science, mathematics. I've never been around so many PhDs in my life. Um, and at the same time, they have a deep connection to why this matters and who could get hurt. And a lot of times that happened because they had an identity that was marginalized. They were women, they were people of color, they were Jewish, they were of a different sexual orientation, non-binary. I mean, any number of things where they could see a perspective different that was blinded in the way the technology was programmed. And it gave them not just a special knowledge and insight, but a special humanity. And I think that's what they share with the film. It's not just their technological expertise, but also the empathy that they bring.
So I have to ask. I know that it's mostly character based, but you do deal a lot with facial recognition and not just the other forms of AI and machine learning in film. So, um, was the choice on going with AI and facial recognition because of these people, or you had other stories that you took out because they didn't fit into this path?
Oh, you're absolutely right. There is a series. I mean, there could be one whole film on AI and criminal justice, one whole film on AI and healthcare. In even now with COVID-19 and these tracking algorithms that we're seeing. Another one on education and algorithms and the way they're used as gatekeepers of who gets into university, and what we're giving up now as our children go to school online and now have to decide between going to math class and invasive surveillance. I mean, because we all have to participate now increasingly on these platforms, and we don't yet have enough protections in place to guard our rights, rights that we hold dear in democracies.
You do touch on this a bit on the discrimination in work, where you're terminated by an algorithm. So how did you get to that story? Was this
that I have to thank Kathy O'Neill in Weapons of Math Destruction. She tells a story that leads me down this path. Because this is an algorithm that was being used. Ironically, it's so strange because it was developed to measure fertility in bulls. And it came to measure whether a teacher is a good teacher. Talk about misuse of algorithms. And this algorithm was deployed all across the US in New York City, but also in Houston, the case that I use in the film, where Daniel Santos, who, if you spend 3 minutes with this teacher, you just know he's a good teacher. You can feel his commitment.
Yeah.
You can just feel that he's the kind of teacher that changes lives. I was lucky to have a few teachers like that. I hope everyone has. And had won every award for good teaching. And yet an arbitrary algorithm was introduced and just called the teacher a bad teacher. And what they were finding is a lot of times, Mr. Santos in the film works with a population that is predominantly Latino in Texas, and maybe working in a community that is mostly English as a second language, and coming in with test scores at a certain level. And the algorithm is just grading on scoring, not taking into account what a child is actually learning. And Kathy O'Neill helped me understand, like, how do you even get an AI who can grade whether a teacher is a good teacher? You know, either they're teaching to the test, you know, and ignoring everything else, and ignoring the fact that people have different abilities in the classroom, and how can they measure empathy, and how can they measure all the way a teacher works with different levels in a classroom and different cultural backgrounds. It's just impossible. And yet what I found in my film was something alarming, was that AI that has not been vetted for accuracy, has not been vetted for racial or gender bias or harming people, causing unintended harm and hurting people, is already making decisions about who gets undue police scrutiny, you know, whether a teacher gets promoted or fired, you know, who gets a good quality of health care, who gets hired, you know, very ideas that, you know, here in the US, people fought for those civil rights, fair housing, fair health care, equal opportunity. It's something that we value as a society. And yet what I saw is this sort of opaque hand of artificial intelligence could be discriminating and rolling back civil rights without us knowing. Subjecting, for instance, as we saw firsthand in Coded Bias, you know, a 14-year-old Black child in school uniform being stopped by the police by a wrongful identification. Here in the US, the first wrongful identification, often because this technology is being used in secret. And a Detroit man was held for 30 hours, arrested in front of his wife and his family, and never asked for a license because a computer had wrongfully identified them. That's how much trust we've put in machines. And what I've learned is that shouldn't be the case. We cannot let our humanity leave the room on technology that is not empathetic. We cannot use our better sensibility as humans. We're in a place, I think, with COVID-19, with movements for racial equality and civil rights happening across the US and across the world. And I think we're in a moment in this particular crisis where we're being asked to lead from a deeper place in our humanity, a place that values human rights. And just to break that down, that means creating a culture that values the inherent value of every human being. And what I hope is that that will be the guiding principle, and democratic values will be encoded into our technology also, that we'll be able to bring more of our humanity to technology.
So there's a problem with your statement here, and I'll flip it to a question in just one sec. That you say we have to put humanity in technology. Now, who puts humanity in technology? It's the programmers that we know are mostly male, white dominant, whatever, and the government that governs them, which is, well, worse off in most cases. So do you trust your government? I know it's political, but being political is all about what you've done until now. So do you trust your government to fix the algorithms, or do you want someone else to do that?
Yes, I actually, if I have to trust someone to make decisions about how these very powerful invasive surveillance technologies that have the capacity to be predatory are used, if I have to trust someone to make those decisions, I would like to trust elected officials in the context of a democracy. That is where I would still put my faith. And yes, and it should not be left to the technology companies themselves. But that being said, we cannot.
That's not the only two choices.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And what we saw here, and I'll give you an example that is concrete, that in June, we saw IBM say that they would stop researching and selling facial recognition to law enforcement. Microsoft said that they would stop selling to police departments, and Amazon said they would put a 1-year pause on law enforcement. That is a sea change that I never thought in the making, when I started making this film, would happen. And that happened both because of groundbreaking research, the women like Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru and Deborah Raji, who did the research that proved these technologies were racially biased, but also had to do with engaged citizens in the streets all over the country saying, we recognize now, we understand as citizens that if we care about Black lives, we actually need a moratorium on law enforcement use of facial recognition because we know it's racially biased. And we don't have any laws until we do. And I'll give you an example of this. There was a moment where Joy testifies before Congress, and there was a right-wing Republican named Jim Jordan of Ohio. And he said, and it was, when he was alarmed, I understood. He said, wait a minute, 117 million Americans have their face in a facial recognition database that police have access to, and no one in an elected official, in an elected office, gave the green light or has any kind of oversight over this. And he said, that is terrifying. And when I saw that people on both sides of the line, police and military, are just picking up these new tools. Private corporations are selling um, to law enforcement directly without any government oversight in between. And so yes, I do. I trust my government to make, and the people that I elect in a democracy, the people that I vote for, it's the only power that I have, to make decisions about this.
So now let's head off to some circular logic. Don't you think these algorithms will interfere with your elections in 2 months' time? Aren't you afraid of the biases?
Well, this is why we need government oversight.
Facebook...
Absolutely. This is why we need government oversight, because these elections can do harm. Facebook made decisions to be that were not in favor of democracy. And Facebook is a threat to democracy in many ways, because it's not made a decision to protect political speech as truthful, to vet political speech in line, which is something you would have to do if through television and other. And this is now this is now our public square. It's where people get their information. And so we need to hold these companies to higher standards and set new rules for their information to be truthful and responsible and transparent.
But as long as they can influence on who gets elected, because they have the eyeball time, how would you generate the trust with your elected officials if your elected officials are elected by people who are affected by these algorithms? That's the question that we need to solve today.
Well, my solution as a filmmaker is to make a film and tell stories, and to draw connections between understanding the science. None of us should be checking out when we understand AI. These are the technologies of the future, and hopefully some of the science is made simple in the film. And also connecting that to what harm it can cause. The things that you mentioned earlier, water, the climate crisis, COVID-19, those are all things that require complex thought, scientific communication, sometimes global cooperation. We're solving complex problems, and we need, as these technologies become the basis of everything we do in the world, we need them to reflect our values.
So you traveled the world quite a lot for the film, at least it seems that way. Were you concerned or afraid when you went through gates and all the cameras in airports, where airports are the most surveilled place in the entire world? I mean, you're just making a movie and people are telling you stay away from the camera, and you're going through these biometric sensors when you pass your passport. How did that feel?
I'm South Asian, and let's just say that I got randomly checked at airports so much anyway that I went and got my retina scanned by the government to say I'm here. You can just, it's fine. But even that decision, that was my State Department. That wasn't, and they told me, well, hold on to that data. They gave me, I read the thing. I didn't go through Clear, which is a private company. We don't know who they're selling my fingerprints and my eye scans to. But all of that is to say, and I live in New York where there's plenty of CCTVs. And the truth is, I don't know how many of them are facial recognition cameras. My friend was assaulted on the subway and they caught the person in 10 minutes. I mean, because of the cameras and facial recognition, and they would call that a win.
They caught a person.
They caught a person, exactly. They caught a person. And so the truth is, we just need more transparency. We can't have our law enforcement picking up a new tool and experimenting with our rights. There's got to be a way these technologies roll out. What is scary is, to me, think about this for a second. You have a self-driving car. It goes on the highway without there being any rules in, these companies are putting on the highway to test them. And because there are no laws in place, the lawmakers aren't keeping up with the rate of deployment. And the thing about these technologies is that they can be biased, they can hurt people, and they can be disseminated at massive scale all around the world.
So one of the first games I give to my students to play in my first class, I teach law, is there's an MIT app that allows you to choose who will die. You run the algorithm for the car, and there are passengers inside, and there are people on the road, and you have to crash, and you have to choose. Are you going to kill an old person, a newly born infant, and you have to hone the algorithm in such a way to make it better. And they run that experiment. It's an experiment they run for a long time. And you let your students understand that in every moral choice you make, someone is going to be affected, and that there's no right choice in a lot of these cases. Like you have to choose whether you're going to kill 2 passengers in a car or 3 pedestrians. And the author of the algorithm has to decide whether he puts the people in his car first or the general public and the benefit of humanity. So before we cut into questions from the audience, I want to have 2 last questions that I have for you. The first is, after all you've learned, would you travel to China, or is that a big no for you?
Would I what?
Travel to China after your whole
No, I would not
episode?
travel to China. No, I would not travel to China. No.
And is there a plan on having Coded Bias 2.0, a revisit after 5 or 6 years to see how algorithms were better, or have you changed them in 5 or 6 years?
Would I go forward 5 years and see how algorithms have
Would
changed?
you do a film in 5 or 6 years to see how much have you made an impact? How
No,
much
but I'm sure some other
algorithm?
filmmaker will do that.
Okay. So last thing, have you noticed any effect your film has on activists at all? How people decided to change according to after watching your film? Was that
I think this sea change around facial recognition that happened in June, if if my film going to Sundance and getting some positive press did something small in pursuit of that, I'd be grateful. But I think the real credit goes to the researchers and the activists for making that win, and the people inside those technology companies who decided to do the right thing, starting with IBM.
so? The first comment question we have from an anonymous attendee, and I love anonymous people because anonymity is great. They say, amazing and educating film. Thank you so much. Do you think this knowledge could ignite any change in the way we use algorithms? And did you witness any change in the world after the film? So I think we've answered the second part. Um, can can you
Yeah,
say?
I mean, I think the company change is a big part. I think that yes, I mean, hopefully the film explains concepts that people may have never thought of before, and I think that education in itself is the first step. Think about climate change before the inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth was pivotal in sort of raising mass awareness about climate change. And I hope that Coded Bias, in the same way, will help raise awareness about algorithmic bias. And I hope people will see the film at Doc Aviv and talk about it, at the dinner table and with their colleagues, and share it and talk about how it impacts their own life.
So until we get the next question in the pipe, what's your next project? What are you planning to research?
I'm working on a slate of films right now, so it's quite busy. A few documentaries and a fiction film.
Okay. I didn't see any other questions in the QA. So, um, is there anything you want to learn about Tel Aviv, Dak Aviv? Anything that um, would interest our listeners and viewers to know? Anything that you want to add?
No, I just hope, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to present the film in Tel Aviv and to, especially being such a leader in technology. And I hope it's something,
That's not a good thing. I mean, for so
well, well, it is in the sense that it's a powerful place to share coded bias. So it's
we
just,
had some impact this week. AnyVision, which is an AI company for computer vision, um, was I don't know if denied or delayed their investment from Microsoft because of human rights issues. And now today we learned in the news that they're selling their non-civilian operations to another company in order to proceed. So yeah, you do have some impact. So thank you very much for your time. It's
thank
a
you.
great pleasure to host you. It was a great film to watch. I watched it twice, but that's because I had to prepare questions. And I really hope that other viewers would enjoy it. And hopefully we'll meet soon in happier circumstances. Thank you.
Thanks so much for everyone for being here. I appreciate the opportunity. Be well.